Let me tell you something today that might hurt a little, but it's the kind of hurt that heals. Because the truth is, the one move that leaves him missing you every single day is not chasing, not begging, not explaining, and not proving your value. The one move is this: you stop being available to someone who didn't appreciate your presence. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Let me slow this thing down and talk to you real plain, because this first truth right here changes everything. Emotional absence is more powerful than constant presence, and most people don't understand that until it's too late. You see, when you are always available, always responding, always fixing, always showing up no matter how you're treated, people stop feeling your impact. Not because you aren't valuable, but because they never get the chance to feel your absence. Human beings don't measure worth by what's constant. We measure it by what we almost lost. When you were there every day, checking in, holding things together, being patient when patience wasn't deserved, you thought you were building love. What you didn't realize is that you were also removing urgency. You were teaching him that no matter what he did, you would still be there. And when someone believes your presence is guaranteed, they stop protecting it. That's not cruelty. That's human nature. Men, especially, don't wake up missing something that's always within reach. If you're always answering the phone, always available emotionally, always forgiving without change, there's no reason for reflection, no space for thought, no moment where the heart goes, wait a minute, something's different. But the moment you step back, something shifts. When your voice is no longer in his ear every day, when your energy is no longer filling the room, when your care is no longer cushioning his mistakes, that silence starts talking. Loudly, that's when the mind starts replaying moments. That's when he remembers how things felt when you were around. That's when he notices the emptiness you used to fill without ever being asked. Absence forces awareness. And listen, this isn't about disappearing to punish someone. This is about removing yourself from a situation where your emotional labor was being taken for granted. When you stop giving what was never reciprocated, you create contrast. And contrast is what makes people feel lost. See, your emotional presence did more than you realized. You brought stability. You brought reassurance. You brought warmth. You brought understanding when he didn't even know how to explain himself. And when all of that suddenly isn't there, it creates discomfort. Not anger, not drama, discomfort. The kind that makes a man sit alone and feel something he can't distract himself from. That's when missing you begins. Because now, there's no one reminding him of his potential. No one smoothing over his rough edges. No one absorbing the emotional weight so he doesn't have to face it himself. And for the first time, he has to sit with the reality of his choices. You didn't change. The environment did. And here's the part most people struggle with: staying on emotionally even when you could go back. Because the temptation is to return when you feel lonely, to reach out when you miss him, to explain yourself one more time. But every time you do that, you break the spell. You remove the silence that was doing the work for you. Silence is powerful because it doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It just exists. And in that space, the truth gets loud. When you stop being emotionally available, you force someone to feel the gap between what they had and what they lost. You force comparison. You force memory. You force realization. And realization doesn't happen in conversation. It happens in quiet. That's why this move works. Not because you're trying to be missed, but because you finally stop giving more than you're receiving. You stop being the emotional safety net. You stop cushioning consequences. You allow life to teach the lesson you were never meant to teach yourself. And let me tell you something important. If your absence brings peace instead of panic, that tells you everything you need to know. But if your absence creates reflection, restlessness, and longing, that's because your presence mattered more than you realize. The key is this: emotional absence only has power when it's rooted in self-respect. If you leave hoping to be chased, you'll suffer. But if you leave choosing yourself, you'll heal. And healing changes your energy. Your posture changes. Your voice changes. Your standards change. And when he sees that the person who used to pour into him is now pouring into herself, that's when it hits deepest. Because now he doesn't just miss you, He misses access to the version of you that loved him freely. You didn't disappear to be remembered. You stepped back to protect yourself. And sometimes protecting yourself is the loudest message you'll ever send. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Now let me talk to you about the second truth, because this one right here separates temporary attention from lasting impact. Self-worth is the most powerful form of attraction you will ever possess. Not beauty, not words, not effort, self-worth. And the moment you start honoring it, everything around you starts responding differently. See, when you don't value yourself, you teach people how to treat you. Every time you accept inconsistency, you normalize it. Every time you explain your pain instead of protecting your peace, you send the message that your boundaries are flexible. And when boundaries are flexible, respect becomes optional. Most people don't lose relationships because they ask for too much. They lose them because they accept too little for too long. You were giving love, time, understanding, patience, but deep down there were moments when you knew you were shrinking. You were adjusting your expectations so he wouldn't feel pressured. You were minimizing your needs so you wouldn't seem too much. And the problem with doing that is the more you disappear, the less there is to miss. Self-worth changes that the moment you stop auditioning for a role you already earned, something shifts in your energy. You stop chasing validation. You stop waiting for permission to be important. You stop explaining why you deserve consistency, honesty, and effort. And when you stop explaining, people start noticing, because confidence doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly in what you tolerate, in what you walk away from, in what you no longer negotiate. When you choose yourself, you're not rejecting him, you're redefining yourself. And that's what makes him feel the loss. Because now the dynamic has changed. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're choosing. Men feel that shift. Even if they can't explain it, they feel it. Your tone changes, your reactions change, your availability changes. You're no longer operating from fear of loss, but from certainty of value. And that certainty is unsettling to someone who benefited from you doubting yourself. Here's the truth. People don't miss what they think they can replace, but they always miss what they realize they never deserved. When your self-worth rises, your standards rise with it. You stop accepting half love. You stop being impressed by bare minimum effort. You stop settling for potential instead of reality. And when you stop settling, you become a mirror that forces him to see what he offered versus what you required. That reflection is uncomfortable because now he realizes that the version of you he had access to, the forgiving, always available, endlessly understanding version, is no longer reachable. Not because you're cold, not because you're angry, but because you finally understand your worth. And that understanding changes how you move. You don't rush to reply. You don't over-explain. You don't argue for clarity. You let actions speak. You let silence speak. You let consistency, or the lack of it, tell you everything you need to know. Self-worth gives you patience without attachment. You're no longer waiting to be chosen. You're watching to see who qualifies. And when he sees you living your life without needing his validation, that's when missing you becomes real. Because now you're not just gone, you're elevated. You're no longer reaching down to keep the connection alive. You're standing where you belong. And if someone wants access, they have to rise to meet you. That's a hard pill for someone to swallow when they benefited from you meeting them where they were while abandoning yourself. Let me say this clearly. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you love less. It means you love yo or self more. And that kind of love is magnetic, it's steady, it's unshakable, and it doesn't beg. When you walk in self-worth, you don't threaten anyone, you expose them. You expose effort, you expose intentions, you expose readiness. And if someone feels uncomfortable with your growth, it's because they were comfortable with you staying small. So when he misses you every day, it won't be because you chased him into realization. It will be because you walked away with dignity, because you stopped trying to prove your value to someone who was benefiting from you forgetting it. Self-worth doesn't just make you attractive, it makes you unforgettable. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, Now, let me talk to you about this third truth, because this one right here is where most people get uncomfortable. Silence and boundaries reveal true intentions, not arguments, not ultimatums, not emotional speeches at 2 in the morning. Silence, boundaries, and distance. That's where the truth shows up. See, when you're constantly explaining how you feel, constantly trying to get someone to understand you, you're giving them room to respond with words instead of actions. And words are easy. Promises are easy. Apologies are easy. But effort, that's expensive. Consistency, that costs something. And boundaries are what separate who is serious from who is just talking. Most people don't ignore your needs because they don't hear you. They ignore them because they don't have to face consequences. Sub, when you finally stop repeating yourself, when you stop reminding someone of what you deserve, when you stop negotiating basic respect, the conversation changes. Because now there's no noise to hide behind. There's no emotional explanation to respond to. There's just a boundary. And boundaries don't argue. They don't beg. They don't explain. They simply stand. Silence makes people show their hand. If a man truly values you, silence doesn't push him away, it pulls him closer. He notices the distance. He asks questions. He adjusts behavior. He looks inward. But if he was only comfortable when you were overgiving, over-explaining, and over-accommodating, silence exposes that too. Either way, you get clarity. That's the power of boundaries. They don't demand change. They reveal willingness. You see, when you were always available, always responding, always smoothing things over, he never had to confront the impact of his actions. You filled the gaps, you made excuses, you carried emotional weight that wasn't yours. And when you stop doing that, life removes the cushion. Boundaries create friction, and friction creates truth. The moment you say, I won't accept this anymore, without raising your voice, without threatening to leave, without writing a long explanation, you shift the dynamic. Because now access to you requires effort. Emotional access requires consistency, and not everyone is willing to pay that price. That's when intentions become visible. A man who wins, he will step up, not because you forced him to, but because your boundary showed him that access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. He will feel the difference in how you move. He will sense that you're no longer trying to convince him to choose you. You're watching to see if he will, and that awareness is unsettling because silence doesn't tell him what to do. It gives him space to realize what he's losing. Every unanswered call, every moment you choose peace over argument, every time you don't chase clarity, that space becomes a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Silence removes distractions. When you stop reacting, he can no longer blame miscommunication. He can no longer say he didn't know how you felt. The absence of your emotional labor makes the truth obvious. Either he steps into responsibility or he fades away. And both outcomes serve you. That's the part people miss. Boundaries aren't about control. They're about self-respect. They're about protecting your energy so you don't keep pouring into something that drains you. And let me say this, boundaries will cost you people who benefited from your lack of them. That's not a loss, that's a revelation. When he starts missing you every day, it's not because you argued harder, it's because your silence forced him to hear himself. Your absence forced him to confront the reality that you were the emotional anchor, and now that anchor is gone. But here's the key. You have to mean it. Silence only works when it's backed by self-respect, not resentment. Boundaries only hold when you're willing to enforce them. If you set a boundary and break it the moment you feel lonely, you teach people that your words don't carry weight. Consistency is what gives boundaries power. And when you stay consistent, something shifts inside you first. You stop waiting for behavior to change. You stop monitoring responses. You stop checking for signs. You become calm, grounded, certain. And that certainty is felt. Men don't respond to pressure the way they respond to clarity, and silence provides clarity like nothing else. So whether he comes closer or drifts further away, you win. Because now you're no longer confused. You're no longer guessing. You're no longer stuck in emotional loops. You're standing in truth. And when a man realizes that your silence is not punishment but peace, that's when missing you becomes unavoidable. Because he understands that the version of you who tolerated confusion is gone, and access to you now requires intention. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Now let me give you this fourth truth, because this is where everything comes together. When you choose yourself, he feels the loss. Not immediately, not always dramatically, but deeply and often permanently. Because the moment you stop centering your life around someone who is inconsistent with you, you shift the entire balance of power. See, for a long time, your focus was outward. You were thinking about how to keep the connection alive, how to make things work, how to be patient, how to understand him. You invested energy into fixing, holding, and sustaining something that required two people but was being carried by one. And while you were doing that, you were slowly neglecting yourself. Choosing yourself interrupts that pattern. When you start prioritizing your peace, your growth, your healing, something changes in the air. You no longer move from fear. You no longer operate from anxiety. You no longer make decisions based on what if I lose him. You start asking a different question. What am I losing by staying like this? That question is powerful because once you see how much of yourself you've been giving away, it becomes impossible to unsee it. You notice how tired you were, how often you doubted yourself, how much emotional weight you were carrying alone. And the moment you begin to pour that energy back into yourself, the relationship loses its grip on you, and that's when he feels it. Not because you told him you're changing, but because you stopped revolving around him. Your time shifts, your attention shifts, your priorities shift. You laugh more, you rest more, you stop waiting by the phone, you stop checking for validation. And that independence creates a void where you used to be. People feel when they are no longer the center of your world. And here's the truth. Most people don't miss you when you leave physically. They miss you when you leave emotionally, when you're no longer available to absorb their moods, when you're no longer there to reassure them, when you're no longer bending to keep the peace. Choosing yourself removes the safety net. Now he has to sit with his choices. There's no one to soften the consequences, no one to translate his intentions into excuses, no one to make him feel secure while he gives uncertainty in return. And that discomfort is where realization begins. Because while you're rebuilding yourself, he's confronting the absence of what you provided. You see, when you choose yourself, you don't disappear. You rise. And that rise changes how people see you. You're no longer pleading for effort. You're no longer negotiating your worth. You're no longer asking to be chosen. You've already chosen. That confidence is felt even in silence. And let me say this, choosing yourself doesn't guarantee he'll come back, but it guarantees something far more important. You won't abandon yourself again. And that's where your power is. If he truly valued you, your growth will draw him toward reflection. He'll realize that the version of you he had access to is no longer available. He'll feel the weight of losing someone who loved deeply, gave fully, and believed sincerely. And if he didn't value you, your growth will expose that too, because he won't be able to meet you where you are. Either way, you gain clarity. The reason this move leaves him missing you every day is because it's irreversible. You can't unknow your worth. You can't unlearn self-respect. You can't go back to being the person who accepted less once you've tasted peace, and peace changes everything. You walk differently, you speak differently, you choose differently, you stop romanticizing potential and start honoring reality. You stop hoping for change and start living in truth. That's when the loss hits him hardest. Not when you cry, not when you argue, not when you beg, but when you move on with grace, when you're no longer angry, when you're no longer trying to prove anything. Because indifference rooted in healing is louder than any emotional reaction. He misses you not because you're gone, but because you're no longer accessible. The door isn't slammed, it's simply closed, and closed doors create finality. Choosing yourself doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. And when you become whole, you no longer need someone to complete you. You invite them to add value, or you continue forward without them. That's the move that leaves him thinking about you in quiet moments, late at night, in moments of reflection, in spaces where distraction can't save him. Not because you tried to be unforgettable, but because you finally remembered yourself.